Hello, my friends. Hello, and welcome once again to Stately Vaughan Manor, where Roger and I are here today to talk about an occult detective, my favorite occult detective. And I'm talking about this character today because it is Occult Detective October. If you're familiar with the small corner of BookTube that Roger and I inhabit, you've probably noticed a lot of occult detective videos floating around out there, a lot of really good ones. And that is because of this reading event, Occult Detective October, created by MJ over at Reading This Life, a fantastic booktube channel you all should be watching. I'll link all the co-hosts down below. We have a couple of co-hosts who are real authorities on this subject. But I was wondering, how can I contribute to Occult Detective October? And I thought, you know what? I'm going to talk about my favorite occult detective. Now, I have talked about this occult detective before a couple years ago, but, it's been a while. And so I thought, I'm going to talk about this character again in a little bit more detail, perhaps, and I'll talk about this particular set of books. So the character, of course, is Jules de Grandin, created by Seabury Quinn, and the set of books is from Nightshade Books. And it's a 5-volume set that actually collects the entire run of Jules de Grandin stories. That's a lot of stories. Seabury Quinn wrote 92 stories about Jules de Grandin. And Seabury Quinn was writing these in Weird Tales at the same time that Robert E. Howard was writing, and Clark Ashton Smith, and H.P. Lovecraft. But Seabury Quinn outlasted those writers. The Jules de Grandin stories ran from 1925 all the way up through 1951. Enormously popular with readers. Seabury Quinn, believe it or not, was the most popular writer in Weird Tales magazine. Hard to imagine today because Robert E. Howard and Lovecraft and Clark Ashton Smith are so celebrated. Then they should be because they're fantastic, but you don't hear much about Seabury Quinn. And for the longest time, if you heard about this author at all, or this character, Jules de Grandin, it was derogatory. A lot of bad things were said about this author and this character. There's literary snobbery in every genre, I think. And Seabury Quinn, I think, got a lot of unfair criticism. He has been accused of being a hack more than once. And when I was first becoming interested in Weird Tales magazine and weird fiction from the 1920s and 30s, every time I heard about Seabury Quinn or Jules de Grandin, it was like, yeah, this author sucks and this character sucks. And so when I finally found a paperback book, a small collection of Jules de Grandin stories, I was like, wow, I finally get to read this writer, even though, I know it's going to suck because I always hear how terrible this stuff is. Well, I read this book and I liked it a lot. I was really entertained and I was like, this stuff is good. It is very pulpy, enormously pulpy, but for me, that's not a bad thing. It's okay to have stories that are just entertainment. There are no deep meanings behind any of the stories of Jules de Grandin. At least, maybe there is and I'm just too dumb to see them, but I don't think so. I don't think there's any deep meaning behind any of these stories. They're just written as entertainment, which is fine. That's a good thing. And these stories, they are very formulaic. They're basically, every story has its own monster or menace that Jules de Grandin in this case has to defeat. Jules de Grandin, a French detective who's brilliant, of course, and a great detective who also has all of these other skills that just pop up throughout the stories. He has every skill you want a pulp hero to have, probably. He meets the American Dr. Trowbridge and they become great friends. Dr. Trowbridge basically is Watson. He's Jules de Grandin's Watson. He chronicles these stories of Jules de Grandin. And so these two characters meet. Jules de Grandin visits Dr. Trowbridge in his home in Harrisonville, and eventually just stays. He comes to visit and just never leaves. He's one of those visitors. And they have amazing adventures together, frequently supernatural adventures, but not always so. Some of the supernatural menaces turn out to not be supernatural. Sometimes it's just a lunatic, sometimes it's a criminal, sometimes it's a mad scientist causing trouble. But very often it's a terrifying supernatural menace, and Jules de Grandin faces so many different kinds of creatures: vampires, werewolves, giant snakes, ghosts, and a bunch of things that you would never have thought of. Jules de Grandin faces all of these menaces. And it's just a tremendously entertaining set of stories. And I'm so happy that Nightshade Books actually reprinted all of them. And they also have a best of volume, which I do not own because I have the complete set. But if you're just interested in sampling these adventures, well, I'll put a picture of it right here if I can find one. If I can't find it, I'll just put a picture of Roger up there if I can't find the cover, but I think I'll find one. And so that's the best of volume that you could find. But I have the complete adventures, and this is the first volume in the complete adventures, The Horror on the Links. Seabury Quinn was very happy to reuse titles from other books and other stories. He did that frequently for fun, I think. And this first story, The Horror on the Links, is actually really, really good. And this first volume has stories from 1925 through 1928. The first story, The Horror on the Links, appeared in Weird Tales magazine, October 1925. That began the Jules de Grandin adventures. So this volume has all of those. And the second volume is The Devil's Rosary. And I should take a moment just to talk about the artwork on the covers. This series of books has wonderful covers. And let me get the artist right. The artist is Donato Giancola, and he just does a magnificent job on the covers. He really gets this character down with the blonde hair and the mustache and everything. He has this character down. And so this second volume has a lot of stories in it from just 2 years, 1929 and 1930. And at this point, Jules de Grandin was very popular. And the readers of Weird Tales were clamoring for more. So we get a lot of stories from those 2 years in The Devil's Rosary. And then we move on to Volume 3, The Dark Angel. The Dark Angel. And this volume has stories from 1931 to 1933. And so we get the early 30s in this one. Then Volume 4, we actually get Dr. Trowbridge on the cover there. So we get to see Dr. Trowbridge with Jules de Grandin and various supernatural weirdness. Now this volume has stories from 1933 through 1938. And there were a couple years here where there were only a couple Jules de Grandin stories published. Like in 1934, there were only 2 stories. In 1935, there were 3. In 1936, there were 2. At this time, Seabury Quinn was writing other stories. But he kept on with the Jules de Grandin stories, even though he was writing a bunch of other stuff. The final volume, Volume 5, Black Moon, probably has my favorite cover. I love this cover for Black Moon. And this volume has the stories from 1938 through 1951. And the very last Jules de Grandin story published was The Ring of Bastet from Weird Tales, 1951. And that was it for Jules de Grandin. But that's a pretty long career for a supernatural occult detective in the pulp magazines. He had a really long run. And like I said, he was enormously popular. So it's interesting how for decades this character and this writer just seemed to disappear. After the pulp magazines disappeared, very difficult to find any stories by Seabury Quinn outside, an occasional anthology here and there. And then there was that set of paperback books that did not reprint all of the stories, but at least it got the stories out there so that people could read them, including me. I was very happy to find that one paperback book. And of course, this was back in the days before the internet, and you couldn't just order every book that you could, that you heard of. It was a different time. I'm old. I'm old. And so it's fantastic that we have this set of books now. And I do highly recommend them. They are very much pulp stories, though, and they are very much products of their time. And there are good things and bad things about that, but yeah, they are very much products of the 1920s through the early 1950s, clearly. And like I said, though, they're fun, and they're frequently over the top in the way only pulp stories could be. Frequently very gruesome. Seabury Quinn was not afraid to get gruesome, and of course, for me, that's a plus. And so if you're thinking about reading anything for Occult Detective October, plenty of new stuff out there that's certainly worth reading. Occult Detective magazine is out there, and you should certainly pick up a couple of those and read some Occult Detective magazine. But you probably want to pick up this character, Jules de Grandin, because Jules de Grandin is, in my opinion, the ultimate occult detective. So there, I'll shut up now. That's all I have to say about Jules de Grandin. I will catch you next time.